That being said, if Costco and Powell Acres want to engage in this agreement to have those items and negotiate those items and execute those items, that's between Costco and the residents of Powell Acres. The attachment before was due to the rezoning, and I believe me, I understand the position that the Powell Acre folks are in, but it comes down to the law, and basically the law is clear when it comes to site plan regulations. If the ordinance allows it and the applicant meets it, we can't say no. That's it. When it comes to rezoning, you have a little bit of leverage to negotiate, and that's where we were at the last meeting. But because that rezoning no longer exists, there's nothing in our ordinance that requires these things. They have basically met the ordinance requirements outside of probably some of the work with the wet weather conveyance. But you know, I think the issue at this point is whether or not whether or not this agreement's going to happen, but whether or not this agreement can be formally attached to the site plan. And I do not think it can, but you know, that's a decision that this body's going to have to make.
Question. Well, let me ask a question, Dick. Tom can come down. He's on the way down. Gary, we put things in our motion and adopt things almost every meeting that where we get the cooperation of the developers and we codify it in our actions. Now, if we adopt the same exact same wording we had from last time, except now it's based on the 50-foot, okay, then we could adopt that. It's a Costco can come to this podium and they can speak to that. I mean, right?
Right,
I mean,
but less than...
If they're not voicing any objection to it, like we do with everybody else, we treat them just like anybody else. If they've got an objection or they want to work with the adjoining property owners or whatever the action is, like, you know, doing more than exactly what is required. We do that all the time. So what's different from this?
Well, you know, without Costco being here to speak on their own behalf on this issue, I don't want to speculate. You know, this is my own professional opinion on this issue, and
they were informed of the meeting, right?
I'm sorry?
They were informed of the meeting, right?
Right. Right. I mean, the agreement's not going to have any more binding effect if it's attached to the site plan.
Our intent relative to those 4 items.
Mm-hmm. And that, like I said, I mean, that's the decision this body's going to have to make, and that's, you know, my professional recommendation is that it can't be. Tom will speak on the law with regard to this, but I understand exactly what you're saying.
Hear from Tom.
And those are good points. I think from what I have heard from the lawyer that is working with Costco and what Mr. Smoke has heard from the Costco representatives, the developments that we're talking about here do not change their agreement to do the things that they have agreed to do. Generally speaking, and this goes specifically to Mr. St. Clair's question or his comments, when parties in a site plan consideration are in agreement, the neighbors and the developer, when they're in agreement and it's clearly written out what it exactly is that the conditions are, then there's absolutely nothing wrong, assuming the parties agree, to put those things in as conditions to the site plan approval. However, when they're not in agreement, and I'm not saying that Costco's not in agreement with what they've agreed with you, because they've told me that they are. The problem is we haven't gotten it written down yet, and believe it or not, as simple as those conditions appear on the piece of paper, they're, you know, hardly a sentence. The words, there's a lot more to be said about those things than what was in the minutes of the meeting last time. The agreement needs to have some teeth that will give the rights in the future so that so that those covenants run with the land. And my understanding is that Costco is willing to do that. The problem we have is that because those things that they have agreed to do are not things that are in our regulations that we can force them to do, it's not, in my view, appropriate for us to make them conditions until those things are written down and everybody's in agreement with them. We don't want to give, if we make those things conditions of the issuance of a building permit, for instance, and we're still working to get the language written down, and I don't think we're going to have any problem getting the language written down. As a matter of fact, the agreement, the first draft, has been done, and the town staff is reviewing it now. The problem is I wasn't in the meetings. Nobody has bothered to call me. I hadn't heard from Mr. Rossfield or anybody else to explain the exact details of what they have agreed to. For instance, what kind of wall they're going to put. I mean, I've got a blank in there for the things that I don't know about that we can add in, and that agreement is ready to be, I think, circulated here pretty quickly. But that doesn't solve the underlying problem is that to have as a condition on the approval of the site plan things that we don't have the authority to make them do is where the problem comes in. Now, if we had the agreement in final form and they were willing to say, yes, this agreement, we'll agree to that to be a condition, then that would be something different. But we're not to that point yet. And so, I'm sorry, say that again.
But that begs the question of what is your timeline for the agreement?
Well, you probably want to read it first, don't you?
Well,
I think we
I
do
have a
an
couple of
agreement.
questions I'd like to ask of y'all, but I need one of you to go up to the podium to answer so we can get them on the
We
record.
need to have a spokesperson, and if you'll go up there and tell us again who you are, if somebody can answer our questions.
I just have some basic questions. Number one is, you had 4 conditions, and have you pretty much agreed with Costco what they will do for those 4?
Yes, we have. We had Jeff Rutter there, as I said. It was a very agreeable meeting. I'm trying hard to find just what those agreements were, but one of our principal concerns was the wall that they had proposed to build, the rock-filled basket wall, and they agreed to a keystone wall. They had already gotten that approved from their upper management. They had agreed to the landscaping and the increase in the volume of the detention basin, and it was a very brief meeting. In fact, we spent at least half the time going over Costco's corporate structure and their desire to be good neighbors and et cetera. It was a very agreeable meeting.
Well, my next question then is also fairly basic, and that is, do you have reason to believe that they will not honor their agreement?
No, I think they will, but I would like to hear that from them. I have, as I said, I tried to get hold of Jeff and haven't been able to since he's on vacation, but I have no reason to believe that they've changed their position. They had approved these conditions in Costco's management. They're not in the scale of things, they're not terribly expensive, so.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else have any questions? If you would please go over there.
Well, I was just going to say that, and that's my understanding. I mean, it's easy to write into an agreement that what kind of wall they've agreed to. It's easy to write in the agreement they're going to increase the capacity of the detention to cover a 200-year storm, whatever that means. I'm not an engineer. I don't know how you would say that. I'm waiting on somebody to help me put that to where there's no dispute about it. Now, the issue of the wet weather conveyance and what they're going to agree to do on your property and their property, I watched the tape of the meeting, and in an attempt to figure out exactly what was going to be expected of that, working on that wet weather conveyance, and frankly, I mean, I've been drafting contracts for 30 years. I'm not exactly sure how I would describe that. I think I'm going to need an engineer to help me figure out how to explain so that we objectively know when they have done what they agreed to do. Same thing with the landscaping. I can write that they will follow the landscaping ordinance that covers buffer zones up on top of that retaining wall, but I've also got to put some things in there that give rights into the future so that people can enforce when a plant dies or maintenance is needed up there. There needs to be some more stuff in there to force them to do that. And that's a give and take thing between you all and them, and it's just going to take a little bit. But the point is we can't make conditions that we don't really understand what they mean. I mean, that's the concern, because then if we get down and a condition does not happen because it's unclear exactly what was meant, then we end up having a problem that none of us want. And so that's the problem. We've got to stay within the legal structure that we can stay, that we're allowed to stay in, and that's what we're trying to do here, and not to change anything that's been agreed to or anything else. But this is a former client of mine, so we better not dispute what I say.
And to some extent, we were cohorts in crime, but and Tom is kidding you. He's been drafting legal documents longer than 30 years. That's to my personal knowledge.
I know it looks that way.
I almost don't have a horse in the race, other than the fact that my daughter-in-law Pam and my son Brian live in Powell Acres. And just sitting back and listening to both sides here, it sounds like, first of all, the ordinance that's proposed to be changed this evening has existed in error since 1990. Nobody died, nobody's dog got run over, any of that stuff. The agreement between Powell Acres and Costco appears to be, from everything I'm hearing, relatively close to being finalized and drafted in a form, and I understand what Tom's saying. He doesn't want to see this thing 5 years down the pipe degenerate into a Who Shot John, and that's just common sense. Would it be inappropriate to ask you all to postpone the vote on this for some fixed period of time and give the Powell Acres folks and Costco an opportunity to work out their agreement and get it in front of Tom or whoever Tom delegates, and let's see if it can't be incorporated, because I can understand the folks in Powell Acres wanting to see this codified. And I do know, as Ed St. Clair pointed out, that it is possible to do that, provided, as Tom says, you have it properly defined. So could we maybe give some time to give the folks an opportunity to get it defined and locked down and signed?